This is TWiT.
Delta Airlines has hired David Boies, yes, that David Boies, to seek damages from CrowdStrike and Microsoft. You may remember Delta was the airline that was down for, I think, 10 days, suffered $500 million in losses, canceled thousands of flights, stranding many, many people, including Christina Warren and others. And they say if CrowdStrike had just done their appropriate due diligence, this wouldn't have happened.
So
This is Delta's complaint. CrowdStrike caused a global catastrophe because it cut corners, took shortcuts, and circumvented the very testing and certification processes it advertised for its own benefit and profit. If CrowdStrike had tested the faulty update, by the way, capitalized faulty update on even one computer before deployment, the computer would have crashed. Now, again, we're going to say that you are, Alex, and kind of a competitor, work for a competitor. So take this, in consideration.
And in response, CrowdStrike said that it was Delta's fault for having antiquated infrastructure, which, I don't know how you vet that, but it would not shock me that an airline has antiquated infrastructure. If you look at Southwest, they have struggled with this problem of technical debt for some time.
That's right. Yeah. Many people who were bit by this CrowdStrike thing got up and running much more quickly. In some cases, instantly. We had one listener email us saying we had CrowdStrike running on our perimeter machines, so they crashed immediately, which kept all of the internal machines safe. And we were able to fix that fairly quickly. We felt, we had a lot of our listeners who spent long hours that weekend fixing the thing. So, yeah, I mean, I have to say it seems less credible that Delta's problem was CrowdStrike's and Microsoft's problem and was more Delta's problem.
To be clear, they didn't end up suing Microsoft. So that was the original complaint about Microsoft, but the lawsuit was only against CrowdStrike, which I think is the right thing. Because in the end, Microsoft didn't do anything wrong. So it looks like
So Microsoft has an API that CrowdStrike could use, Sentinel-1 could use to operate not at ring zero with these sensors.
So every EDR, every high-end anti-malware product has a kernel module. You have
huh?
You have to. Yeah.
Microsoft's APIs are insufficient to do the job.
That's right. They are. What they have done is after this incident, they held a summit up at Redmond, and I actually went up there. CrowdStrike was there, Trend Micro, Sophos, kind of everybody from the anti-malware industry was there. And they're talking about a future in which you don't have to run in the kernel. I don't think it's going to happen for quite a while. And it's because there's at least 3 reasons why you have to be in the kernel. The first is to see all the things you need to see. There's a bunch of telemetry you need to gather that is just not made available to user mode. Now, that could be made available to user mode, but Microsoft would have to just do a really good job of being comprehensive in doing that, and they never have in the past. The second is to, at a very fast rate, be able to let these pieces of software intercept and decide whether or not a piece of potentially malicious code can actually do something, right? So, we don't just alert, oh, this thing's bad. We do things like stop file access, stop network access. And doing that from user mode can cause humongous performance issues, right? So you're never going to have Microsoft create a call out to user mode that then synchronously blocks a file read. That would be insane to have 128 core machine production Windows server that is doing synchronous user mode calls for individual file accesses. And so doing that from a kernel thread is really the only way.
You just have to. You just have to be at that low level to monitor and to do the kind of blocking that you need to do.
Yeah. And the third reason that I don't see ever being fixed is if the bad guys get into the kernel, the only way we can protect ourselves from being killed by the bad guys is from being in the kernel. And it's only been a couple of months since Microsoft had a massive kernel vulnerability, right? So it turns out they had this IPv6 kernel vulnerability that has existed in every version of Windows since Windows Vista. So it's been around for over a decade. And if the bad guys can get in the kernel and we're only in user mode, what would happen is they could just make us disappear. It's like, traveling back in time and killing your grandparents. It'd be impossible to protect ourselves. And so that it's called anti-tamper. And so CrowdStrike, us, Trend, Microsoft themselves all have kernel modules. Now the difference here is you don't have to put all of your code in the kernel. And that's an engineering architectural decision CrowdStrike made, was they have a bunch of dangerous code in the kernel and they're pulling their signature files into the kernel and they're parsing them in the kernel. In fact, they were doing regexes in the kernel and they're not checking these regexes. And they did an out of bound regex.
Oh, geez. It was a regex that crashed it?
Yes. It was a regex that was looking for too many items and they were doing like an unbounded regex.
And so it just filled the buffer and overflowed.
Right. And so what you need to do is, like, if you have a kernel module, you just minimize it and it does the minimal stuff. And then you do all the dangerous stuff in user mode. And that's what we've done the entire time. And so I think where we'll end up is Microsoft, they have this dream of pushing everybody out of the kernel. Realistically, I think what they can do is they can push CrowdStrike to, one, test stuff. So, two, not deploy everything all at once, which
do the minimal amount in the kernel.
And do the minimal amount
that you have to do.
Yes. Which is then this is the big argument now that Delta's going to make, right? Is that everybody else in the industry pretty much was doing these things. And so the fact that CrowdStrike was not doing stage rollouts, was not doing telemetry on rollouts, was not doing testing, because like you said, this instantly killed a Windows machine as soon as a name pipe was created. Yeah. Name pipes are created dozens of times a second, even on an idle Windows machine. Right. So like it's
you would
the
have
kind
known.
Of thing you should know immediately if you do any testing.
What they said was that their test harness was broken, and the guy who pushed it out didn't know that, so he did test it, but the test hadn't been updated, so the test had a stub that just said, yeah, passed.
Yeah. Right, and he didn't run it even on a Windows virtual machine.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's fine to have tests, but you should probably run it once on a machine.
And then you do stage rollouts, right? You never roll something out
and then that's
to
the other
millions
thing.
Of machines at one time.
And we've seen that. Apple does that. Microsoft does that. They don't push out these things all at once.
Yeah.
Nobody does that.
And you have telemetry.
So you think there is some culpability on CrowdStrike's part?
Oh, absolutely. I think they absolutely screwed this up. These are like basic engineering things, right? Like doing stage rollouts is how people have done this for 20 years. Having telemetry in rollouts is how people have done this for 20 years.
Right.
I guess the tricky question is Delta going to be able to kind of prosecute that level of technical argument and do you push for a jury trial, Owen? I guess you do, right? Or no?
12 random people in Fulton County. You have to explain to them like stage rollouts. That's
you don't. That's the point. You just say they screwed us because they didn't do the right thing, and look what happened. And the jury goes, "Yeah, that was terrible."
Of course, this is also probably why you do it in Fulton County. Is I'm guessing Delta Airlines is like a beloved brand.
Exactly.
In Georgia.
Yeah.
I mean, David Boies knows what he's doing, right? Like
he's a good lawyer.
It seems like this will settle. I mean, it
didn't though, right? Like that's why they filed it. It hasn't settled yet.
Right. Yeah. That it has not settled so far suggests that either CrowdStrike is digging in their heels or Delta's asking for too much.
We should just mention, for people who don't know the name David Boies, you should. He was the guy who led the government's prosecution of Microsoft back in the late 90s. And he also represented Al Gore in the election of 2000. He's been very active. Represented Theranos. Not to his best.
He teamed up with Olson on making gay marriage legal, right?
Yeah, that's right. He overturned Prop 8. Good for him. He also represented Harvey Weinstein, as any attorney does. You play both sides, but he's a very.
We got paid up front on that one.
He did also represent two of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. So I think, an attorney's job is to be an advocate and on both sides of it. And he's a very, very good attorney. So they hired the best. I'm sure the most expensive anyway. We should.
Oh my God. I mean, that's an interesting question. Is like, are they paying him hourly or is he just splitting it 50-50?
Just split the settlement. $500 million, Delta said they lost due to CrowdStrike. That's a lot of money. Hey, thank you for watching this little snippet from our big show, the News Roundtable, This Week in Tech. I'm Leo Laporte. Each week we cover the week's tech news, in-depth analysis, but it's also fun and engaging. You'll find it at twit.tv along with all of our shows. And if you want more, just hit the subscribe button, and we'll be sure to bring you a lot more great content. Thanks for listening.